Mr. President, as you noted, I come from the state of Minnesota, and the state of Minnesota is a state that believes in science. We brought the world everything from the Post-it note to the pacemaker. We're the home of the Mayo Clinic and the University of Minnesota. We believe in science. And as a former prosecutor, I also believe in evidence. And what we have been hearing from this administration time and time again, whether it's about energy policy, where they've actually done literally nothing the last 8 years when it comes to pushing us forward where we should be when you look at the rest of the world with technology and with hybrid cars and electric cars and with new gas mileage standards which came out of this Congress, or whether it is about climate change, which I'm about to address today. They have been living in an evidence-free zone, and it's time to bring out the evidence. The administration made headlines twice last week in its ongoing effort to do nothing about climate change. We learned that there was political interference with science, political interference with the evidence and the facts. We also learned that the administration won't issue the global warming regulations mandated by the Supreme Court. I'm a member of the Environment and Public Works Committee, and some of my colleagues might recall last fall when Dr. Julie Gerberding, the director of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, was invited to testify before our committee. She was invited to testify on how climate change could impact public health. Unfortunately, her testimony that she delivered was markedly different from what she and her staff at the CDC had prepared. The Office of Management and Budget got its hands on the speech and removed about 7 pages that discussed the impacts of global warming. 7 pages redacted. These pages included explanations and descriptions of the links between climate change and heat stroke, weather disasters, worsening air pollution, allergies, food and waterborne infectious diseases, mosquito and tick-borne infectious diseases, and food and water safety. I would say those things, Mr. President, seems very relevant to the job of the head of the CDC and something she should be allowed to testify about when it comes to climate change. Well, at the time, it was a brouhaha because someone leaked the actual testimony. A whistleblower brought it to our attention. And then at the time, the White House claimed that they needed to edit her testimony because of its, and this was a quote, broad characterizations about climate change science that didn't align with the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. Testimony was, in fact, closely aligned with that report. Her testimony, in fact, included the statement that, quote, the west coast of the U.S. is expected to experience significant strains on water supplies as regional precipitation declines and mountain snow peaks are depleted. She went on to say, forest fires are expected to increase in frequency, severity, distribution, and duration. In fact, the IPC has found that, quote, warm spells and heat waves will likely increase the danger of wildfires. So they were completely consistent. And I don't think I have to tell anyone, you don't have to read a report to know what's been going on in California in the past 2 weeks. Global warming didn't cause these fires, but it certainly intensifies the 3 main causes of wildfires: the high temperatures, summer dryness, and long-term drought. Minnesotans know when the wool is being pulled over their eyes. Let's face it, the Bush administration didn't change Dr. Gerberding's testimony because of concerns regarding accuracy. They didn't worry about if it matched up with that report because it in fact exactly did. They did it for political reasons. So it was really no surprise to me at all when the news broke last week that both the Office of the Vice President and the President's Council on Environmental Quality had actually stepped in to interfere with her testimony. This revelation came to us from Mr. Jason Burnett, a former Associate Deputy Administrator of the EPA, who informed Chairman Boxer that he had been approached by the Council on Environmental Quality staff and asked to work with the CDC to remove from the testimony any discussion of the human health consequences of climate change. Upon reviewing the original testimony, Mr. Burnett came to the same conclusion that we've reached. Since the science was correct, he didn't think he should alter the statement. He wasn't operating in an evidence-free zone. He wanted the facts out there. He wanted the information out there. And I'm sorry to report that even though the administration has been caught red-handed in this behavior time and time again, it hasn't stopped them from continuing their interference with scientific facts. Last week we learned that the Office of Management and Budget has been sitting on an email from that same former Associate Deputy Administrator of the EPA regarding the endangerment of public health or welfare from global warming. The OMB received this email, and once they realized what it contained...
Senator's time has expired.
Mr. President, if I could have one more minute.
Without objection.
The OMB received this email, and once they realized what it contained, they first tried to make Mr. Burnett take it back, and then they actually tried to bury it. We also learned last week of the administration's decision to leave office without taking any regulatory action to address climate change. This is wrong. The bottom line is that this White House is leaving it to the next president to show leadership on energy and to show leadership on climate change. Mr. President, I can't say it more plainly than this. Our climate is changing. If we don't act to stem this tide, it will have grave and disastrous impacts on every single facet of our lives, from our health to our economy to our foreign policy. And it should begin with science, it should begin with evidence, and it should end with science, and it should end with evidence. That's how we'll come to the right policy outcomes. We cannot have the wool pulled over the eyes of the American people anymore. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.